Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The thunder that shook the glass walls of the dean's office was nothing compared to the icy dread freezing the blood in my veins. But before the sentence of my expulsion could fully leave the dean's lips, the heavy oak doors blasted open, silencing the room instantly. Julian Vane did not walk. He prowled into the room, a predator in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than my parents' entire lifetime earnings. The air in the office grew heavy, suffocating, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out to fuel the fire in his obsidian eyes. He didn't look at me, the scholarship student he treated like furniture in our shared penthouse, but instead slammed a thick, leather-bound folder onto the dean's mahogany desk with a violence that made the crystal carafe rattle. I suggest you reconsider the definition of plagiarism, Dean. Julian's voice was a low, velvet baritone that scraped against the nerves, dangerously calm. Unless you prefer the board of directors to reconsider your tenure. Ren didn't steal those designs. I watched him draw every line. He belongs to me, and by extension, his integrity is under my protection. He grabbed my wrist, his grip bruising, possessive, and dragged me out of the office before I could breathe a word. He had just saved my life, my future, and my dignity. But as soon as the heavy doors of the administration building closed behind us, shielding us from the storm, he dropped my hand as if my skin burned him. He walked away without a word, his back a fortress of indifference, leaving me shivering in the hallway, indebted to a man who looked at me with eyes that promised ruin, yet refused to acknowledge my existence. Chapter 1. The glass cage. To understand why Julian Vane terrified me, you have to understand the absurdity of my situation. I was Ren, a third-year architecture student clinging to a scholarship by my fingernails, smelling of graphite and cheap instant coffee. Julian was the heir to Vane Construct, a conglomerate that practically built the city skyline. Through a clerical error in the university's housing algorithm, or perhaps a cruel joke by fate, I was assigned to the luxury suites usually reserved for the elite. I couldn't afford the maintenance fees, let alone the lifestyle. I had been packing my bags, ready to beg for a transfer to the cramped dorms on the east side, when Julian had stopped me in the living room on the first day. "Stay," he had said, not looking up from his tablet. He was sitting on a white leather sofa that looked like a cloud, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "I can't afford the split, Mr. Vane," I had mumbled, clutching my duffel bag. "I didn't ask you to pay," he replied, finally turning those sharp, dark eyes on me. They were cold, calculating, devoid of warmth but brimming with intelligence. "I require assistance. My coursework is tedious. General education requirements that waste my time. You are on the dean's list. You will complete my assignments. In exchange, I cover the rent and provide a stipend." It was a deal with the devil. I knew it. But the stipend was enough to send money home to my mother and upgrade my drafting supplies. So I sold my soul. For 6 months, I was his ghost writer and his ghost roommate. I wrote essays on ethics while he dismantled rival companies on the phone. I solved advanced calculus problems while he stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city he would one day own. The dynamic was sterile, transactional, or so I thought. But lately, the air in the apartment had changed. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, heavy with static. I would catch him watching me while I worked at the kitchen island, his gaze tracing the curve of my neck as I bent over my blueprints. When I'd look up, he would turn away, his jaw clenched, radiating a coldness that felt like a physical blow. He paid me, he saved me, and he ignored me. Chapter 2. The silent treatment. The ride back to the penthouse after the dean's office incident was excruciating. The interior of Julian's sleek black sedan smelled of leather and the faint, woodsy scent of his cologne. Sandalwood and something sharper like steel. "Julian," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "Thank you. Back there." I don't know what to say. He didn't look up from his phone. The blue light illuminated the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the aristocratic slope of his nose. "Don't say anything," Just ensure the quarterly analysis for my business strategy class is on my desk by morning. The dismissal stung more than it should have. Is that it? I snapped, the adrenaline from the near expulsion turning into indignation. You just saved my entire career, threatened the dean, and now you're asking for homework? What is your deal? The driver flinched. No one spoke to Julian Vane like that. Slowly, Julian turned his head. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw something raw, something starving, lurking beneath the surface. It was a look of such intense longing it made my breath hitch, but it was instantly smothered by a glacier of restraint. My deal, he said softly, his voice dropping an octave, is that I protect my investments. You are an asset, Ren. Don't read poetry into a ledger. He turned back to the window. The car stopped at our building. He got out without waiting for me. That night, I worked on his analysis with a fury that burned. I typed until my fingers ached, channeling my confusion into the work. Why did he call me an asset? Why did his heartbeat spike when I accidentally brushed past him in the hallway? I had heard it, or maybe I felt it. The air around Julian always felt electric, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. I finished the paper at 3 a.m. and walked to his bedroom door to slide it under, as was our custom. The door was ajar. I knew I shouldn't. The Vane privacy was legendary. But I heard a sound, a ragged intake of breath, a groan of pain. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the city lights filtering through the rain-streaked windows. Julian was sitting on the edge of his massive bed, his head in his hands. His shirt was unbuttoned, revealing an expanse of pale, sculpted muscle, but his posture was that of a broken man. Julian, I whispered. He snapped his head up. His eyes were wide, dilated, wild. He looked like a cornered wolf. Get out, he rasped, his voice cracking. Are you okay? I stepped closer, ignoring my survival instincts. I said get out, Ren. He stood up, knocking a lamp off the nightstand. It shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Do not come near me. But I saw it then. The tremor in his hands. The sheen of sweat on his forehead. He wasn't sick. He was terrified. You're having a panic attack, I realized, the pieces clicking into place. The control, the coldness, it was a dam holding back a flood. I didn't leave. I walked over the broken ceramic and stood before him. He towered over me, his breathing ragged, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. Don't, he warned, backing away until his legs hit the bed. I am dangerous right now. I can't maintain the walls. Then let them fall, I said softly. I reached out and took his trembling hand. His skin was burning. The contact was like a catalyst. Julian gasped, his fingers instantly clamping around my wrist, tight, desperate. He pulled me toward him, collapsing back onto the bed and dragging me down with him. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his entire body shaking. Too loud, he mumbled against my skin, his voice thick with exhaustion. The world is too loud. You are quiet. You are the only quiet thing. I lay there, frozen, as the heir to the Vane Empire clung to me like a lifeline. I realized then that his coldness wasn't hatred. It was insulation. He was hypersensitive, overwhelmed by the noise and demands of his life, and I was his sanctuary. He ignored me not because he despised me, but because he wanted me too much, and he was terrified that his chaotic world would shatter my peace. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Lies. The next morning, I woke up alone. The bed was made, the sheets cool. On my nightstand sat a cup of coffee and a note in elegant, sharp handwriting. Forget last night. Payment transferred. I crumbled the note in my fist. He was rebuilding the walls. But you cannot unsee a man's soul once he has laid it bare. I went to class, but my mind was in the penthouse. The plagiarism scandal had been squashed so thoroughly that the professor who accused me, a man known for taking bribes from rich students to fail scholarship kids, had retired effective immediately. Julian's power was terrifying. When I returned to the apartment, Julian was there, surrounded by blueprints of the new Vane headquarters. He was back in his armor. Three-piece suit, perfectly styled hair, expression of stone. The analysis was adequate, he said without looking up. I have another assignment, a critique of these structural loads. He pushed a blueprint toward me. I looked at it. It was complex, professional work, far beyond the scope of a business student's general electives. In fact, looking closely, I realized something that made my blood run cold. This isn't homework, I said, my voice steady. Julian paused. Excuse me, I've been doing your homework for 6 months, Julian. But looking back, the calculus wasn't for a class. It was for logistical optimization of your shipping lanes. The essays on ethics were drafts for your public press releases. And this is the actual structural layout for the Vane spire. I slammed my hand down on the marble island. You're not a student struggling with Gen Eds. You graduated 2 years ago, didn't you? I checked the alumni registry today. The silence that stretched between us was deafening. Julian finally looked up. He set his pen down, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the paper. Took you long enough. Why? I demanded, my voice rising. Why the charade? Why pay me to do homework if you're already a certified genius who runs a conglomerate? You could hire top firms to do this. Why play house with a broke student? He stood up and walked around the island. He moved with that lethal grace, closing the distance until he was inches from me. The smell of sandalwood filled my senses, making my head spin. Because, Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper, if I simply gave you money, your pride would have made you leave. You would have chosen the squalor of the East dorms over charity. He reached out, his fingers hovering near my face before finally, tentatively, touching my cheek. His touch was electric. I needed you here, he confessed, the admission torn from him. I need the sound of your pencil scratching on paper. I need the smell of your coffee in the morning. I need to know that when I come home from a world of sharks, there is someone real waiting for me. So you lied? I whispered, leaning into his touch despite myself. I constructed a scenario where you would stay, he corrected. I am an architect of situations, Ren, but I miscalculated one variable. What? My own capacity to resist you. Chapter 4. The breaking point. The revelation hung in the air. He hadn't just been ignoring me. He had been protecting me from his obsession. But now that the truth was out, the air in the penthouse shifted from cold to scorching. You think you can just manipulate me? I asked, though my anger was losing the battle against the pounding of my heart. Use me as a glorified pet to soothe your anxiety? No, Julian said fiercely. He grabbed my waist and pulled me flush against him. The heat of his body was overwhelming. Not a pet. An anchor. Ren, do you have any idea how hard it is to not touch you? To watch you struggle with your models, biting your lip, getting paint on your nose, and not drag you into my bed. You have a funny way of showing it, I choked out. You treat me like an employee, because if I treated you like what I want you to be, you would run. His eyes searched mine, frantic and vulnerable. I am possessive, Ren. I am jealous. I destroyed that professor not just because you were innocent, but because he made you cry. I wanted to burn the university down. That's toxic, I breathed. I know, he admitted. That's why I stayed away. That's why I ignored you. I'm not the Prince Charming in your shoujo mangas. I'm the villain who locks you in the tower. I don't need a prince, I said, my hand moving up to grip the lapel of his expensive suit. And I'm not a damsel. I'm an architect, remember? I know how to build structures that withstand pressure. Julian stared at me, his eyes widening slightly. You aren't afraid? I'm terrified, I admitted. But I'm also tired of the cold. If you want me, Julian, stop paying me. Stop lying to me. Just take me. Something in him snapped. The restraint that held him together shattered. He kissed me. It wasn't a gentle, tentative first kiss. It was a claiming. His mouth was hot, demanding, tasting of scotch and desperation. He kissed me like he was drowning and I was oxygen. I melted into him, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. He lifted me up effortlessly, sitting me on the marble island, stepping between my legs. The power dynamic shifted in that moment. He was physically dominant, yes. Stronger, richer, more powerful, but he was on his knees emotionally. He was worshipping me. "I will cancel the contract," he murmured against my lips, his hands exploring the curve of my waist under my shirt. "No more payments. No more fake homework." "Then how will I pay rent?" I teased breathlessly. "You won't," he growled, nipping at my jaw. "Partners don't pay rent." Chapter 5. The masterpiece. The transition wasn't seamless. We were two broken people trying to build a foundation on a fault line. Julian's possessiveness was a constant struggle. He wanted to know where I was every second. He glared at anyone who spoke to me for too long. But I pushed back. I forced him to communicate. When the anxiety of running an empire threatened to crush him, I didn't let him retreat into his ice fortress. I made him talk. I made him sleep. One evening, months later, I was working on my final thesis project. It was a model of a community center designed to bring light into the darkest parts of the city. Julian walked in looking exhausted. He had just come from a hostile takeover meeting. He loosened his tie and stood behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It's missing something," I sighed, staring at the miniature glass atrium. "Structure," Julian said. He reached over, his large hand covering mine on the drafting pencil. "Here. If you reinforce this beam, you can double the height of the glass." "More light." He guided my hand, sketching the correction. It was perfect. It was elegant. "I thought you said you needed me to do your work." I smiled, leaning back into him. "I needed an excuse." He kissed my temple. "But you have surpassed me, Ren. You design with empathy. I only design with logic. You are the better architect." "You saved my scholarship," I reminded him. "You saved my soul," he countered. "Fair trade." He turned me around in his arms. The cold, indifferent billionaire was gone. In his place was a man who looked at me with open, terrifying adoration. "I have a new proposition," he said. "Oh no. No more homework." "No." He smirked, a rare, genuine expression that lit up his dark eyes. "A partnership. Vane Construct needs a lead on the new Cultural District project. I want you. I haven't even graduated yet, Julian. That's nepotism. It's recognizing talent," he said firmly. "And sleeping with the boss is just a perk." He kissed me then, slow and deep, full of promises. We had started as a lie, a transaction born of desperation and hidden desire. He had tried to keep me at arm's length to protect me from his own darkness, but he hadn't realized that I wasn't afraid of the dark. I was the one who knew how to design the lights. The rain lashed against the windows of the penthouse, but inside, it was warm. The homework was done. The debt was paid. And the roomie who ignored me? He was currently looking at me like I was the only building in the skyline worth preserving. And that is how the poor scholar constructed a home in the heart of the untouchable air. If you enjoyed seeing Ren dismantle Julian's defenses brick by brick, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, is it romantic or toxic to manipulate a situation to keep the person you love close? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,